So what is arthritis? Arthritis is basically when there are two bones anywhere in your body that start rubbing against each other. And the rubbing, or that pressure, that friction, is really what begins to gradually wear away on cartilage at the end of the bone. So if I had a bone and another bone on top of it, and the two bones rubbing against each other, the cartilage, the smooth lining, the gel lining on the end of either one of those bones can start to wear away. And when that starts to wear away, what it does is it exposes nerve endings underneath, at the end of the bone, underneath that cartilage, and those nerve endings get exposed and they become more open and they become more vulnerable. In your knee, for example, you have about 1,000 nerve endings per square inch on the surfaces of your bone. So a little bit of friction on those exposed nerve endings is kind of like taking a brick and rubbing it on your skin. You've got a lot of nerve endings in your skin, you rub a brick in it, the skin will get red and irritated, it might even be a little bit painful. That's exactly what is happening with arthritis. As that progresses and starts to get a little bit worse with arthritis, the cartilage begins to wear away even more. There's no bone in your body that's actually smooth and completely flat. Bones have all of these little ridges and crevices in them. And what will start to happen is, as the cartilage wears away, which is what made the bony surface flat and smooth, as that cartilage wears away, then you get all of the ridges and the exposures of the crevices and everything, and the bone will start to kind of catch and get stuck. As arthritis progresses, that's what people start to feel, is this catching, or not only pain, but this catching and cracking and popping sensation, because again, these ridges and these crevices are exposed as the cartilage is worn away. So the purpose of the cartilage in your joint is to really prevent arthritis. We all start off with cartilage in our joints. Everywhere where two bones come against each other, they're all cushioned or surrounded by this cartilage at the end. But certain things speed up the degeneration of that, or the wearing away of it. And so that's the purpose of the cartilage, is to keep the joint smooth, rubbing against each other, nerve endings protected so that there's no pain, no exposure. And basically to almost like lubricate the joint so that it's not necessary for the joint to have fluid or swelling in it because the cartilage is there. So what brings on the friction, and it happens over time, it can be a specific traumatic event that brings on a lot of friction, but generally what happens with arthritis is that it develops over an extended period of time. That friction starts out because things got tight around the joint surface got closed. Typically there should be space in between the bones, and the bone should be able to slide and glide without a whole lot of pressure on that cartilage or on that lubricant. But what will happen is things around that joint get tight, it closes the joint up, and then the bones start to rub on each other and everything starts to progress from there. So if we were to talk about knee arthritis, the knee joint is the most common joint in the body where you end up with arthritis. You end up with arthritis there for a number of reasons. First and foremost, the knee joint itself is designed in a somewhat poor fashion. It has a flat surface, the bone in your lower leg, and a curved bone, the bone in your upper leg, sitting on top of each other. And so you have this flat surface and this curved surface that are rubbing against each other. Unlike most other joints that are ball and socket joints where there's actually a socket for it to fit into, the knee joint is a very unstable joint, so there's a lot of potential for slippage and therefore more friction to occur just by nature of design of the joint. Second thing then is, and why the knee is the most common joint, it is where the ground reaction forces coming up and your body weight coming down meet right there in the knee joint at those two bones. And so most commonly, if somebody's going to experience signs and symptoms or problems with arthritis, it will generally start at the knee. Not to say that it can't happen at the hip and ankle and other places in your body, but most commonly it starts in the knee joint. There's really some common signs or symptoms that people that are experiencing even the very beginning of arthritis would experience, and that would be anywhere in your body. But if we were to look at just in the knee, for example, you would start to experience some stiffness and some tightness. Typically that's something that we see in somebody that's active or somebody that's inactive. Let's say I go for a 5-mile run, later on in the day my knee or my leg is stiff or tight. That, believe it or not, is a little bit of a warning sign that there's now more pressure in the joint, more potential for friction on that cartilage and that meniscus, and more wearing of it over time. Somebody that's older, let's say in their 30s, and has some stiffness when they get up after they've been sitting for a while. You go to the movies and you get up after that hour-and-a-half movie and your knee is stiff. That again is a warning sign that that joint is starting to develop the early signs of arthritis. So stiffness is that early warning sign, that check engine light that's going off that tells you there is some pressure on that meniscus, on that cartilage, that you want to make sure that you get looked at. If that pressure and that continues, then that pressure continues to create some wearing of that cartilage. And that wearing of that cartilage begins to expose those nerve endings, even to the slightest bit, and that's what will give you more aches and pains. So now that stiffness, that tightness that was in the joint, let's say again in the knee joint, it starts to turn into more of an ache and a soreness and even a pain in that knee joint, because again, those nerve endings are not being cushioned anymore by the cartilage as much as they were. And that's something that we'll very commonly see in somebody in their early 30s. So what I want you to understand is that arthritis is not a problem for people in their 50s and older. Arthritis is a problem that actually starts potentially in your teens, early 20s, when you start developing that stiffness and that tightness, when it begins to progress into that aches and pains. The third way arthritis will show itself as a common sign or symptom in a knee is that you'll actually start to see some swelling. So your joint will start to need to lubricate itself more because the cartilage is being worn away. So it will flood that area with fluid. Initially, you won't necessarily see the fluid won't be visible. But as you continue to wear away more cartilage, the fluid begins to get pushed out of the joint, and you see it in the tissues around the knee. So when you start to see swelling, that's a sign of some fairly advanced arthritis. If we're talking about a knee joint, or if you see swelling anywhere, it's a possible sign of some fairly advanced arthritis that's progressing because the joint is needing to lubricate that area because the cartilage is gone or significantly gone. If that continues, the lubrication doesn't really work, the progression of the problem will begin. Like I said, you get these ridges and these crevices where the bone kind of gets caught on as it's moving, and that will start to give you some popping and some cracking, as well as significant increases in pain. And that popping and that cracking is a sign that the cartilage is pretty much gone at that point. You've got two bones rubbing against each other, and just like you take two bricks and rub them against each other, that friction, that gritting sound, that's exactly what you're feeling or hearing coming out of your joint or out of the knee joint. Finally, if you don't do anything about it and it actually progresses far enough, you can actually get to a point where you've lost mobility, you've probably lost some function, but hey, great thing, your pain is gone. Well, the downside to that is that yes, while the pain is gone, you've actually worn away those nerve endings altogether. They're dead now. That's why you don't feel pain, but you probably can't get the knee out all the way straight. You probably can't walk normally. You probably can't put pressure on it. So while you think you're actually finally doing better, because after all these years of having pain and due to arthritis or whatever you might have thought it was, you think you're doing better because the pain has gotten better. You've actually lost function. You've actually completely killed the nerve endings on the end of that bone, and the problem, even though it doesn't feel like it, it's actually gotten worse. So again, keep in mind, arthritis starts early on in life. It probably starts to some degree if you're very active as a teenager. You start getting a little bit more friction, you're very hard on your joints, you play a lot of sports, you do a lot of activities, etc. And you start to create that a little bit of wearing on those surfaces. So if we're looking at the knee in general, you're beginning to wear that cartilage just a little bit. And what happens then is that you start to experience that tightness and that stiffness. So understand, those are the signs of arthritis. It is very possible to prevent arthritis from getting worse, but you can't reverse anything that's happened. So the earlier that you start addressing those symptoms, those signs and symptoms that I just mentioned, the stiffness, the aches, the swelling, etc., and prevent it from getting to a point where you've actually killed off the nerve endings, the earlier that you start to address that, the easier it is to prevent it from getting worse and stop it from having a negative effect on you. Because the last thing we want is for anybody to end up needing to have a joint replacement or a knee replacement. So again, you can prevent it from getting worse, and that's really where physical therapy comes in. We can help you to be active, we can help you to have this arthritis in your joint, but have it not affect anything. And how do we do that? We make sure the capsule is doing its job. We make sure the ligaments are able to do as much work as they can. We make sure that the muscles are strong enough to make up for what the ligaments don't do, and that they stop all of that slippage from occurring. Muscle can be strengthened if strengthened appropriately, correctly, and in the right balance of each other, and getting your hip muscles along with your quads and your hamstrings. We can make your knee be just as stable as it ever was and undo the further effects that any arthritis would have. We can make sure then that muscles are nice and loose and stretched out the way that they need to be, and we can most importantly make sure that your kneecap is tracking the way that it should, and all of that works together to stop all of that slippage, which ultimately is what causes the pain. So again, physical therapy and the expert physical therapists here at Loudon Sports Therapy Center can help you with that. We can get it all started by doing an assessment on what is causing your problems, figuring out exactly what of those 5 things is causing your arthritis, figure out if it is arthritis, and if not, figure out what needs to be done to handle it. And when we determine that it is arthritis, and you don't need an x-ray to figure that out, you can figure out arthritis by looking at those 5 things, seeing one of our expert physical therapists, getting everything assessed, figuring out if it's arthritis and then getting you doing the appropriate things for it, and we can definitely help you to get it under control and get back to living life and being able to do the things you want to do without arthritis causing you to have problems.